All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Thomm Jutz. I'm a producer, guitar player, songwriter living and working in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm also a lecturer in the songwriting department at Belmont University. Actually, my history with the Belfast Nashville Songwriters Festival goes back quite a bit. I used to be the guitar player in Nancy Griffith's band, and we played the festival for many years. And that's how I got to know Ann and Colin, and that's how I, through coincidence, was able to make contact between Colin and Ann and Professor James Elliott, who's the department chair of our songwriting program, which has led to the cooperation of our songwriting department and the festival. So I have deep running roots with Belfast, and as a visitor, obviously only. But I miss it. I missed it last year. I wish we could be there together in person this year, but we hope for next year. It's a place that's very dear to me. That feels a little bit like home to me when I go there, and so I can't wait to see all my friends there again, and Colin and Ann and all of listen to all of the great writers and all of the great trad players, and have a pint too. There you go. So let me introduce what I'm going to speak about today. I would like to talk about inspiration and what that means and how we can find our way to it versus waiting for inspiration to always visit us. I think it's a great misperception that inspiration is this elusive thing that comes to us every once in a while, and then it stays away, and there's really nothing we can do. We just have to wait, and the rest of the time we tell ourselves that we're stuck in some kind of writer's block. Well, first of all, I don't believe in writer's block at all. I think if you sit down long enough and stare at an empty page, you'll come up with something. And if you've written before, you'll write again later. You might just not write at this very moment, and that's fine. I think it's my strategy is somewhat that of a child that does this when it doesn't want to see something, and I don't want to even think about writer's block. I don't consider it an option. I just keep working through it. That doesn't mean that I'm just beating myself over the head. If I don't write for a day, that's fine. If I don't write for a week, that's fine too. But I should make an effort to get back to it. And there are certain techniques to make yourself write and to find your way to the muse versus always waiting for the muse to visit you. There are ways of honoring the muse when it visits you, and if you don't do that, those ideas that come to you might be gone. They might go out the window. So we have to learn to pay attention. I think the job description of the songwriter overall is simply this: pay attention. Pay attention to everything you do. Whatever you do as it relates to your songwriting should be intentional. So you should think about it, and you should make time to do it. You should create a space where you can do it. You should create a culture of writing by yourself or of writing with other people that allows you to, that's a platform for you to exercise your writing craft. If you were a woodworker, you would have a workshop somewhere, and that's where you'd work. If you're a songwriter, make a space for yourself, or a writer that's uncluttered. Maybe there are a couple of items that inspire you, but keep the distractions low. Turn off the phone. Shut down your email program. Don't look at Facebook while you're writing. If you're writing, you write. It's like yoga. If you practice, you practice. When you're on the mat, you don't have to make time for anything else. This is your time. Same with writing. So I'm here in my studio where I record a lot of stuff a lot of my records or other people's records, and I keep things around me that inspire me. I have a belt here that was given to me that used to belong to my friend Mag Wiseman, who passed away a couple of years ago. He was a great bluegrass singer, one of the legends of bluegrass. So I keep that here because I can see it, and it reminds me of the great music that Mac made. I have a couple other things here that inspire me. One is a photo of my wife. One is a pin of John Hartford's Aeroplane record. That's a record that really inspired me. The other is an American flag pin that I got the day I became an American citizen, so that's very dear to me. The other one is a little Chinese fortune cookie piece of paper that says, "Laziness pays off now, hard work pays off in the future." And so I have one more. It's a tiny little Buddha statue of the Buddha sitting, and his hand position is in the no fear mudra. So that inspires me to just work through whatever blockages I have at the time. It reminds me to stay patient. It reminds me to not be fearful in my writing. It reminds me to be wide open like John Hartford was when he was writing. It reminds me to be as empathetic as my wife is. When I see her photo there, I have a couple of really nice ink pens that I like to use for writing. This is an old one from the 20s, a Parker Lucky Curve. So those are just little things that I do to create an inspiring environment for myself. And I'm sure you can all come up with similar things to create a nice space for you. Now, I want to go back to the concept of paying attention, which to me is at the heart of being a songwriter. But before, I need to take a sip of coffee. Oh, you might be interested in this. This is my Father Ted coffee cup, and I know that you all know what that is. Most people here don't know this, and it says, "Down with this sort of thing," at the side. I'm sure you've all seen that episode. So, paying attention is at the heart of the whole thing. I live on a small peninsula in Percy Priest Lake, about 30 minutes east of Nashville, Tennessee. And it's very rural here, and it's easy to walk from the house. I don't have to get in a car. I can just walk, and I'm in nature in probably about 6 minutes, and the rest of the neighborhood is very rural, just a few houses. And I've lived here for 14 years, and I can't tell you how many songs I got from this little, I'd say probably 5 square mile piece of land, probably a couple hundred. Just observing the lake in the summertime, observing the birds, observing the deer, the wild turkey, which we have a lot of here, walking around, seeing the lake change in the seasons when they drain the water in the wintertime, thinking about the history of how the lake was created because it's a man-made lake, talking to my neighbors. When my neighbor Ray's mother died last summer, there's a little burial plot that they have behind the house. And it was a real traditional Southern Baptist funeral that follows certain rites and so on. So those are things that come to mind, talking to Ray about his work, about his horses, about his dogs, talking to my neighbor Stan about hunting, about fishing, about all this kind of stuff. Those are things where that's where the songs are hidden to me. You might not write a whole song about this conversation, but you might write, you might use a snippet of that conversation and put it in a song. And so I encourage you to spend, one of the things that to me is really important to stay inspired is spend a lot of time outside. Spend a lot of time walking. Since the pandemic, March 15 through the end of last year, I walked 2,020 miles, walking and running. And it's just good for my body. It's good for my head. It's good for my writing because I see things. So I encourage you to do that. That's one way to just find your way to the muse and to stay inspired, and having conversations with people and using snippets of that conversation in your songs. One of the main things that I try to teach my songwriting students at Belmont is that autobiography does not have to be the centerpiece of your writing. As a matter of fact, maybe your writing would be a lot better if you learn not to write in an autobiographical way all the time. So autobiographical content does not matter. What matters is that you accurately describe an emotion or a situation, and that you describe a situation with empathy for the other person that you're writing about. I have, in my 5 to 6 years that I've been in Belmont, probably heard every song about somebody breaking up with somebody's boyfriend or girlfriend, or I can have better than you and you're not worth my this and this. I think I've heard every version of it, because a lot of young writers feel compelled to write about their inner lives all the time. Now, I would argue that while that's okay, and while there's a certain amount of teenage angst that goes into those songs and it needs to come out, that's fine. But I think sometimes what's inside might want to stay inside or have to stay inside. And maybe you should look outside and write about other people. Maybe it's more interesting how other people have resolved these relationship conflicts versus how you have resolved that. In other words, the autobiographical is not near as interesting as the universal. So one technique that we can apply as songwriters is to look at one situation, but then we pull the lens back and back and back and back and back and back. And we look at the whole, like looking down at Earth from space. Now we're looking at the whole context of human emotions, not just our own. Maybe a song starts with your own, but then you pull it back. All great songs, as my songwriting friend Jefferson Ross says, all great songs are about yearning. There needs to be an element of that in there. I make a point of saying that all songs that we write are about two themes: home and time. Everything else are subcategories of those two big categories, home and time. And yearning is a part of home. A lot of people yearn for a home. A lot of people yearn for a spiritual home, an emotional home, a home in a relationship, a geographical home. So travel is a big theme, but travel is a combination of home and time. It takes a certain amount of time to get from here to there. Writing about our human experience is about traveling through this life, about the stages of life, about maybe hope for a celestial home. I don't know. But I like to keep it within these two. I think about songwriting as these two themes, and that an element of yearning needs to be in songs so we can emotionally access them. Now think about some of the songs that you love. Why do you love them? And see if the elements of home and time are in them, and see if there's a feeling of yearning expressed in them. I'm sure you will find a lot of them. I think if you especially look, let's get back to me writing about this little piece of land here, this little peninsula. Especially if you look at the history of songwriters in Ireland, and not just of songwriters as we perceive that term in the modern context, but also of traditional ballads. So much has been written about the place of Ireland. So a sense of place in songwriting is very, very important to me. I have worked with a lot of songwriters from Ireland, and some were absolutely wonderful. All of them were great in their own right, but some of them felt the need to write about America as a place, but not as a place in terms of, let's say, an Irish immigrant story, but they wrote about the Texas Plains. And I'm going like, you haven't even been here 4 weeks and you write about the Texas Plains, and you haven't even been to the Texas Plains. Now, why should that be interesting to me? Why don't you write about Northern Ireland? Why don't you tell me about boats and the Atlantic Ocean and wind and history and the Troubles and a million other things? So I'm not a proponent of write what you know. I think that's a flawed expression. But if you have a place that you relate to, that you can relate to, that you know intimately well, write about that. Obviously, if you travel somewhere and you see something that really inspires you, it's totally fine to write about that. But I have written songs about the Wild Atlantic Way, but I write them from a perspective of I'm a visitor. I want to see my friends again, not from the perspective of I'm a native. I don't think that would feel right to me. So again, first I said what you write doesn't have to be autobiographical, and now I'm saying write about what you know. I know that that's might sound like a paradox, but what I'm trying to say is, if you write about a place, if you implement a sense of place in your writing, then first go to what you really know. If you want to write about the human experience, about the emotional side of being a human being, then autobiographical matter is not a must. You can write a song from the perspective of somebody else, but you have to do your homework. You have to learn what the circumstances of somebody's life might be to accurately write about them. So when you write about stuff that relates to history, which I do a lot, you have to some extent, do your homework so you're not getting your facts wrong. All right. So here's another thing that I'd like to talk about in terms of inspiration. The great American novelist William Faulkner said that everything that you have perceived becomes an experience. So when you read something, it becomes an experience. Faulkner said, read everything: trash, newspaper, whatever, magazines, great literature, anything you can get your hands on. That's how you learn. And I think he's right. I made 3 records about the American Civil War. Have I lived during the American Civil War? No. Have I lived through any kind of Civil War? No. But you can do your homework. And by reading about it for several years, by experiencing that, by immersing myself in that literature, I felt like I could write about it. And I did. And it was a wonderful experience. And a great learning curve, too, how to write about things in the historical context. So keep that quote in mind. I think it's really important. Everything that you perceive becomes an experience. And so you can write about it. Everything that you see, everything that you pay attention to and go, you can write about it. You just have to let yourself. And most writers are too stuck in but it has to be about me or it's not real. Most people out there don't care. Most people don't care whether it's real or not. They want to feel something, but whether it's about you or not is not relevant at all. I'm sorry about that. So think about that. Anything that you perceive becomes an experience, and so you can write about it. I want to talk about a couple other things here. There are different ways of writing too, and I understand that that's different here in Nashville than compared to a lot of other places. So I make a clear distinction between what I write for myself as an artist, stuff that I'm going to release and want to play live, and things that I write for other people. And I also do a lot of work for TV and movie. So I have these 3 things that I write for. Now, all 3 require a different kind of inspiration. The first category, the stuff that I write for myself, I have to be extremely interested in, and to some extent emotionally involved. But it doesn't have to be my experience again. Again, it's not about autobiography, it's about emotion. So that's typically ends up being stuff that's steeped in history, Southern history, Appalachian history, things that I've seen while I was traveling, playing, touring, and so on. When I write for other people, totally different considerations come in. And so the inspiration for these songs change as well. I might observe certain things and go like, well, there's not something that I can sing, but there's 10 bluegrass artists that could sing about this topic. Let's write for them. Let's see what would inspire them. Can I be a conduit between my original inspiration, write the material so it inspires them to want to sing it? That's a different approach. So I go to that, I come to that with a different mindset. That is made a little easier in Nashville because we co-write so much. I co-write probably 98% of the time. And if you write with people who are really comfortable with writing with and who have the same set of experiences to some degree, it gets very easy. And you can, I wouldn't say easy in the sense of that it's, oh, you just sit down and 10 minutes later you have something. It's just the process becomes easier. You trust each other. You know how to do it. You know how to open up. You know what's too much. You know what's not enough. But I understand that for some reason that's difficult to make happen in other parts of the world. I know several Irish writers who came over here and wrote and then went back and tried to do it there, and there's just nobody's really open to it. Even if you look at somebody as great as Paul Brady, he comes here to write. He doesn't necessarily write with Irish writers. Why is that? I don't know. I don't see any particular reason for it. I think it should be possible anywhere in the world if you make an effort. So maybe that's something that you guys could think about too. Is there somebody in your environment that you'd like to write with, and then start doing that? Even through this pandemic, it's been a learning curve in the sense that all my co-writes have been on Zoom. So I'm very comfortable writing on Zoom now. It's actually increased my output. And speaking of inspiration, output is a direct result of inspiration. I've written with people who live 5 hours away, who I typically would write with once or twice a year. And now we've written 30 songs since the pandemic, just because it's so easy. So I encourage you to try that. And I encourage you to, also one thing I tell my students when it comes to inspiration, not every song that you write needs to be your masterpiece. Writing is also a muscle that needs to be exercised. It needs to be practiced. When you practice running for a race, you don't always run the race. You practice. So when you write, you don't always need to try to write your masterpiece. Maybe you take it as an exercise. Write about a place. Write about somebody else's history. Write about somebody else's emotions. Not everything has to be your masterpiece. Practice writing. It will inform the way inspiration finds its way to you, because the more you write, the more you'll be receptive for ideas coming. Which brings me to, I'll come back to that, but I just want to say that the third aspect of my writing, TV and movie, is a completely different thing, because now I'm inspired by pictures. Okay, so now when I write and somebody says, some of the outlets that I work for say, we need to have 8 instrumentals, and we're going to call this Dark Hollow, and it's going to be stuff that would relate to Appalachia. Then I have to write completely differently. I have to write from a visual, from the visuals that I get from this brief. So now when I sit down, I don't even focus on words, because 90% of the time it's instrumental stuff anyway. But I keep in mind what something like this would look like. I might turn on the TV and find some stuff that relates to that part of the world and listen to the music, but then turn off the sound and see what comes to me. So that's a completely different way of inspiring myself, of finding a way for the muse to come to me. Now, let me go back to a couple of techniques of how you can learn to have inspiration come to you. More and more important to me is stream of consciousness in my writing. Not just when I'm actually sitting down with co-writing partners, or sit down by myself to write, but in my whole approach to songwriting, stream of consciousness has become more and more important. What I mean by that is, let's say you have an idea that you want to write about. I highly encourage you to take a piece of paper or open a Word document, and for 5 minutes, write stream of consciousness without editing anything that relates to that topic. Even if when you find yourself going like, well, that doesn't really relate to this topic, don't turn off that editor. Just put it down. So when I think about my situation right now, I'm thinking about stream of consciousness would be, it's 9:30. I already had a good walk this morning. The coffee's really good this morning. We had a good breakfast. I have a 10 o'clock writing appointment. I'm got this microphone here that I really like, which reminds me that I have to do 4 demos, blah, blah. You just let it flow. But you do that related to a song idea. And do it for 5 minutes. Stop. Take a minute. And then read what you have. and see if there's certain things that you wrote that stand out to you in terms of meaning. See if there are certain words that stand out to you in terms of the sound of the word, and see if you already wrote if your subconscious has already led you to writing certain words that rhyme. You'll be surprised. Very often you'll find words that rhyme, or you'll write something that's really profound and you don't know. You didn't know it at the time. We do this all the time in my songwriting classes, where we start a song assignment with a stream of consciousness exercise for 5 minutes. And then we have each student read to the class. And every time somebody will go like, wow, this is killer. And the person who wrote it has no idea that it's good. It takes somebody else who comes from a different perspective to see what's really good. Now, obviously, when you do this by yourself, you don't have that other person. But you take a couple minutes, walk away from it, and then come back to it and read it. And you'll be surprised how much material is already there. Another thing that you can do, another technique, when you have an original inspiration for a song, you have a line or a title or whatever, write down on a piece of paper every cliche that relates to that, every cliche that you can think of. So when you write about a car, write down speed, tires, the open road, American dream, truck driver, any NASCAR fans, any cliche that you can come up with. Right? 20, 25 things, stream of consciousness. Don't think about it too much. And then look at it and then write the opposite in a column next to it. So car, walking, speed, slow, American dream, lost American dream, NASCAR, Formula One, whatever. It's a stupid example, but you'll be surprised how much stuff you'll come up with just doing that. How many words you already have on the paper that you can put in your lyric. So, and you do all of this stream of consciousness. There's a wonderful book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way that a lot of you might have seen. Maybe not all of you. I don't think there's a lot of great books on songwriting, but I think there's some really great books on creativity. And I actually find it more nourishing to my songwriter brain when I don't read about songwriting, but when I read about other aspects of creativity. And Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way is more like a workbook. It's not a book that you just read. There are exercises connected to it. And the first, and to me, probably her most important exercise, is called the morning pages. So what she wants you to do is every morning, right after you get up, to write 3 pages in longhand, stream of consciousness, not editing at all. A lot of young writers make the mistake of constantly editing while they're writing. It's so disruptive to the flow. Just write. You can always go back to it and make it better later. But if your internal editor is constantly on, especially when you're a young writer, it really disrupts the flow. As you get more experienced, that editor will be there all the time. And you edit as you write. But don't try to force that in the beginning. Let that go. And that's what she's talking about in the morning pages. So you write 3 pages in longhand, and you're not allowed to or supposed to read it for the first half year at least. Collect those pages somewhere, and then after half a year, go back and read them, and you will be so incredibly surprised how much better structured your writing has gotten over the period of you doing this writing. It's really amazing what it does. It sort of restructures your subconscious and how you relate to things. It becomes so much clearer. I've done it for a while, and it was tremendously helpful to me. And there's just a lot of great quotes in the book that are inspiring, some other exercises that I think are valuable. So that's one book that I would recommend to you, which brings me to books and instruments, which are a part of the way that I like to, which are a way for me to stay inspired. So I have a lot of books in our house. We have a lot of books in our house, and I like to leave a lot of them out in the open and not just on a shelf. And I try to make sure that the books that are out are not necessarily big novels, but that they're books that you can pick up on go to any given page, and it's meaningful. So by that, I mean poetry collections, magazines, literary magazines. There's a great book called The Quotable C.S. Lewis that I keep around. There's a book called Home Ground that I keep around that just describes American landscapes in specific words. And just so when you sit down, you have 5 minutes, you just open this book and you look at something, and it makes sense without a larger context. And that helps your brain to connect to it very quickly and immediately, and helps you to write about it, for instance, or helps you to, if you just see one word described by a really good writer, it does something to your brain, and you can carry that forward. It might inspire something, might help you to write. The other thing that I do is I keep my guitars spread out over the house. So when I sit down on the couch, there's a guitar there. And if I feel like I have an idea, I don't have to go to the other side of the house, get it out of a case. By that time, that muse might have already gone out the window. So I keep all those tools around. I have my phone around that I record all my musical ideas on. I have a folder on my laptop with song ideas. I have writing utensils around so I can write stuff down. And I do write it down, every idea. Again, I don't edit at that stage. I just write it down. That way I don't have to worry about forgetting it. And I can interpret that idea later if I want to. And I can go, well, this is nonsense, it's nothing. Or I can go like, wow, that's actually more interesting than I thought at the time. So take notes, record stuff, don't let it go. Another really, really important thing that I learned from my friend Tim Stafford that I write with a lot. When we write together, we always write the lyrics first, and we complete the lyrics. And then we look at, once we're done with the lyrics, we look at what we have and we go like, what might this sound like? And we've both learned that the first thing that comes out of your mouth when you play those lyrics and sing a couple of lines, try to find a melody, try to find a chord progression, record that. Always record that. You have just spent an hour or 2 hours working on these lyrics, and your subconscious has worked on the music, has internalized the rhythm and the rhymes without you having done any thinking about the musical side of things. But it would be impossible to turn that musical side off. So the first thing, when you sit down and write the music to a lyric, record it. 99% of the time, it's the best thing you'll come up with, because everything else you overthink, or we tend to overthink. And when we just play stuff when we're not thinking, we're just free associating, that's typically the good stuff. All right, so The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Another book that I really, really think is a great book for songwriters is a book by the great novelist Stephen King, who wrote a lot of horror novels and is associated with that, but he's an incredibly good writer. And he wrote a book called Stephen King on Writing. And it's one of the best books I've read on writing, on how disciplined he is, how he describes his technique, all that. Read it. It's wonderful. Another book on creativity that I really like is Born Standing Up by Steve Martin, the comedian, who's also a great banjo player. His approach to creativity and how it finds its way, or how it relates to his work, is very, very interesting. So Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. Another one by Walter Isaacson is called Leonardo Da Vinci, and it's one of the most recent Da Vinci biographies, and it's amazing. Talk about a creative genius, and reading about how he learned, how his art changed over the course of his life is just so inspiring. And I've written songs inspired by all of those books. If I have to summarize it, I would have to say, the more I read, the more I write. And I think you'll find that too. I think there is inspiration to be gotten from TV and movie as well, but it's different. I'm not saying that you shouldn't watch TV or shouldn't watch movie, or that there's no values in great documentaries or any of that. There is. But if you're watching a film or a movie or a documentary, you're probably, if something catches your attention and you go like, wow, this would be cool for a song, or it's a great line, chances that you're going to stop and write it down are slim. When you read a book, you can always put the book down and write something down and then come back to the book. That's why I prefer that. Also, when I read a book, I can, if a line catches my attention, I can go back and read that line over and over. Maybe I don't understand it at first. Maybe its meaning evolves as I read it over and over again. I can't do that with a movie, at least not that easily. So the more I read, the more I write. Keep that in mind. I think you will find that too. And again, read everything. Don't narrow your focus. I think that's really, really important. I think that's pretty much the most important stuff about inspiration, how you can find your way to it and open yourself up to it. You honor it by writing everything down, recording everything that comes to you. You expose yourself to it by reading, by going outside, by experiencing life through the lens of a songwriter. You make it come to you by paying attention all the time. It will get better. Even if these concepts seem strange to you and you feel like you can only write a song when something's happened in your life that's so profound that it needs to be put on the page. I'm not saying those are not moments when you need to write songs, but they're not the only moments when we can write songs. The more you write, the easier it will get. The more you'll trust your instincts. The more you'll know if something's good or not good. And obviously, you also need to have a sizable catalog if you want to get some stuff cut. You need to have more than 10 songs if you want to make a record, with 10 songs on them. One of the temptations for young writers today is to immediately record everything they write and put it out because it's so easy to do, because you have a laptop. You can do a lot of good stuff with that, and then you can put it out on SoundCloud. Maybe hold off a little bit. If you want to put out 10 songs, wait till you have 50 and see what are the 10 best ones. Don't immediately looking for outside evaluation or praise. I think can be a hindrance to creativity too. Keep it to yourself for a while. When you have a more sizable catalog, then you present it to some people. Maybe not your mom or your best friend, because they already love you. Maybe find somebody who has a little bit more of an objective perspective. Maybe somebody who's involved in the Belfast Nashville Songwriters program. Maybe Charlie McGettigan, who's a great writer and has a radio show. Maybe somebody local. Maybe you can certainly get in touch with me or any of the other faculty in the songwriting department, and we'll be happy to give feedback. And then maybe decide whether you want to release that body of work or whether you'd rather hold off. Keep in mind, stuff is going to be out there forever. You're going to be associated with that work. Are you comfortable with that? So keep that in mind. One thing that I've really learned from, I try to do a little bit of yoga every day and work out every day. And one thing that I really learned from yoga that really, in my mind, directly relates to songwriting is one teacher who says, challenge yourself with every yoga pose, but also find a moment where you can really enjoy it. And that's, to me, is such a wonderful way of describing songwriting too. Challenge yourself, but find a way where it's enjoyable. Don't beat yourself up over the head. Put it down if it's not going right. But put in an effort. Authenticity comes from effort, from a genuine effort of getting better at something. So do that. Most of all, enjoy it. If we make the joy of writing if we connect it too much to any kind of commercial success, it spoils the whole thing. At the end of the day, it's a great gift to be able to sit down with the guitar and play something, to be able to sit down and sing a song, whether you've written it or not. It's a great joy to express yourself in song and write something. That is a reward enough at the end of the day, if you will. Everything else is just icing on the cake. So that's all I got. I hope this will help you to be inspired, to stay inspired. And I hope I'll see you all in Belfast. Thank you very much for listening to me.